Hi, it's Morgan with 1455. It is our mission to advance the art and craft of the written word and to build a dynamic and innovative creative community. We offer a variety of free online and in person programs, which are fully supported by our sponsors and by viewers like you. If you would like to make a donation of any amount, please visit 1455litarts.org and click support. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. We'll see you on the next one.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the 1455 interview. It continues to be my pleasure to speak with amazing writer after amazing writer. The only regret I have about this series is my already Tower of Babel-like list of books to read is only getting longer, but what else is there to do in life but add worthy books to your list? So I have a feeling I'll add a few more of those today, but I'm really excited to welcome our latest guest, who I consider a friend and a source of inspiration. You'll see why when I read her bio, but this is a mini reunion of sorts. She's a fellow GMU grad. She works at GMU, which is my proud alma mater. So for personal reasons, I'm really excited to talk to Kara today. Let me introduce you to her. Kara Oakleaf's work has appeared in Matchbook, SmokeLong Quarterly, Wigleaf, Booth, Pithead Chapel, and elsewhere. Her fiction has been selected for Best Small Fictions and the Wigleaf Top 50 and appears in the Bloomsbury anthology Short Form Creative Writing. She earned her M.F.A. at George Mason University, where she now teaches writing and literature. And perhaps most importantly, she happens to direct the amazing annual Fall for the Book Literary Festival. And I want to congratulate Kara for concluding what was a very challenging, as 2020 has been, bringing that huge event virtually and pulling that off. We were just talking before we came on that it has to feel good to have that done, but she is definitely an inspiration to me. And by the way, I'd be remiss to not mention, she was part of 1455's Lit Fest this summer. She was on a panel, Motherhood in the Written Word, which was amazing, and video of that is available on our YouTube page, which I encourage you to check out. Kara, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Sean. And I have to say, we took a lot of cues from the 1455 festival this summer, because you guys went first, and then we had our programming starting in the fall. So I felt like I had a good chance to learn from so many people like you before we had to go live with everything.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's and I've learned over the years from you, and of course Bill Miller, our friend and hero. So yeah, it's that in itself, I think, kind of epitomizes when I talk all the time about the literary community and what does that really mean. This real kind of give and take and the assistance and inspiration. It's great to be able to acknowledge that and celebrate it. So cheers to both of us, and let's hope that there's a lot of adventure, but maybe a little bit more predictability in 2021.
I hope so. Yes.
Right on. All right, well, let's get down to business. As always, I'm going to put us on the clock. 14 minutes and 55 seconds. Let's jump in. Kara, what is the first book that made you want to be a writer, or just a book that changed your life?
It would be hard to say the first book that made me want to be a writer, because I've always, since I was very little, been interested in writing. My mother was a reading teacher, so our house was always filled with all of these books that were geared towards like kindergartners and first graders, and I just had those constantly at my disposal. But a book that I might say a book that changed my life is All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. And I would say that because I read it actually at GMU. I just started taking graduate classes, and I thought that I was going to get an M.A. and study lit theory, and instead of doing an M.F.A. and pursuing writing. And then I was in a class with Alan Chuse where we read a number of great books, but also but All the King's Men is the one that kind of sticks in my mind, because I think we kind of read it at a point in the semester where in my other classes I was realizing I probably didn't want to study lit theory. I'm still very interested in lit theory. I think it's a really fascinating field, but what I was also realizing early in grad school is that lit theory was probably going to mean not that you get to kind of play around with all these different theories, but that you're going to pick one, and that's going to be the lens with which you look at literature in your career for the rest of your life. And it wasn't right for me.
Well, I appreciate and sort of envy the trajectory you took. I did go down the path of lit theory and don't regret it at all. It certainly informed a lot of my nonfiction writing and kind of my sensibility. But I would say I spent the first half of my 20s having to write that out of my system fiction-wise, because it gets in there and it's not a space to create creatively in, I don't think.
Yeah. And so like this book was one of the ones where I remember I feel like so much about craft and language just kind of clicked with me as I was reading it. And we were all talking in class about like, here's how this kind of sentence structure, or this kind of word choice, or this kind of imagery conveys one thing or another. And it kind of got me back to this point of like, oh, what I'm really interested in is language in fiction, and how it kind of accomplishes that magic that books do that I love so much. And so that's the book that I always think about, kind of put me back on the path towards studying writing instead of becoming a critic.
Indeed. Well, it's kind of like going directly to the well. And I would take this opportunity to say RIP to Alan, who is an institution at Mason, and was a mentor and teacher to so many thousands of people and the lives he changed. So I think we both can do a virtual high five and a tribute to a great man who's no longer with us, but his work and influence will certainly endure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of influences, impossible but fun question. If you could, who would you name as your most profound artistic influence?
I think this is the hardest question out of your whole list. So when I think about the writers that influenced me most, it's all people that I came to because of my M.F.A. and because of grad school. So I might name like all of my professors and even my classmates from grad school as my most profound influence. I think I would also say, in kind of a roundabout way, maybe like Hans Christian Andersen and the Brothers Grimm, because I realize that so much of what I write now has kind of like some element of magic in it. And many of the writers that I admire are people who are writing with some element of the fantastic, something that's been inspired from fairy tales or mythology or things like that. So I think that might be kind of the root of where a lot of the people that I admire, the writers I admire most, are.
Yeah, and being familiar with your work, having had the pleasure of seeing you read several times now, I get that, but I hope that entices people checking this out, say, what does she mean by that? And go online and find some of Kara's work, because, yeah, she does that. All right, another tough one, but fun one, I think. How about an album or movie, or both, that you recommend without reservation?
So I think I'm just a terrible person to answer this question, because I'm very much a book person. That is my medium. I think my favorite albums are always like a mix CD that somebody who knows a lot more about music put together for me. I might say for an album though, Stop Making Sense by the Talking Heads. That's one that I first discovered because of a mix that somebody put together for me, and I found one of the songs on there and I was like, I need to hear the whole thing. So that was one that I think I'd recommend with no reservations at all.
And hey, kids, those of you scratching your head, there used to be these things called cassettes, and to make playlists we used to have to take cassettes, and you guys know this, but yeah, a shout out to the old mixtape. That's how we used to get turned on to music before, playlists and internet everything. Yeah. So right on. Okay, another impossible one, another fun one. How about what you would nominate as the best first or last line of any book ever?
Okay, this is a good one. I'm not going to do a last line because I feel like that is kind of like a spoiler in some ways. But
good point. Yeah.
But a first line I really like is from 100 Years of Solitude, which I think is a great one. It's many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. I love that. It's so great. It's like you've got these really high stakes right away because we've got somebody in front of a firing squad, and then we have this kind of strange element of, something that somehow makes something very typical like ice feel magical. It's just perfect.
I agree, and you probably won't be surprised to know that's not the first time that line has come
I
up.
figured,
I'm
yeah.
positive it will come up again. I mean, that has to be on the short list of Alzheimer's that no one would disagree with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm delighted that you are reinforcing what so many writers have already said. All right, how about an underrated author that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Okay. I'm going back and forth between a couple of people right now. I'll do. There's a writer named Sabrina Oramark, who has a book called Wild Milk out, and it's very much like a fairy tale inspired.
Love the cover.
And she's always, yeah. So this was out a couple years ago, and I feel like it was on a couple of like best of the year year-end lists, mostly for kind of like the very niche literary magazine types because it's a small press book. But she's also writing a column in the Paris Review right now that's kind of like inspired by fairy tales, but it also talks a lot about like what like life during the pandemic. And she's a fantastic writer. But I feel like in the mainstream, not enough people know about her yet.
Thanks for sharing that. And sure enough, there's another one that goes on my, ever leaning, growing tower, which I'm delighted to add to. So I appreciate that. And I'll definitely check out the Paris Review column as well.
Yes, so good.
Hi, Kara. I know Bill Miller is watching, so no pressure. Why have you not read Moby Dick? Or if you have, is there a classic that you've been meaning to get around to?
I have read Moby Dick. When I was in college, I went to a very small school, and this was the only night class I ever took because they just didn't offer them that frequently. But I took a semester-long course that was just reading Moby Dick, and it was like so every Wednesday night for like 3 hours. That was like my life for a semester, and it was great. We had this. The professor was a very interesting guy who would always go out for a smoke break, and then he would come back and he had it was not cigarettes that he was smoking, which was really entertaining for all of us because this was like the 2000 aughts in Ohio, and it was definitely not legal, but he was a really interesting professor who loved the book so much and made it very, very entertaining and engaging in a way that I might not have otherwise appreciated as a college student. I kind of think it's a book I should go back and read again at some point. So something I haven't read that I mean to get around to, I think I would say Lolita. It's kind of like I don't know. I always feel like, oh my goodness, I'm admitting I haven't read this book, which is crazy, but it, I think anybody who has a life in books knows that you can never really catch up on everything that you actually want to read. That's definitely one I really want to because I love Nabokov's memoir, Speak Memory, which is really good, and that was the first thing I read by him. But somehow I've never gotten around to Lolita, which maybe I'll have to bump that up on the pile.
I never know how or when or why to recommend that particular book because it's so much baggage. But one thing that I think is indisputable is his facility with just the language is such a joy that I would recommend to anyone, even if you don't end up getting into it or any of his books. He is such a master. I think it's good for any writer to see someone operating at that high level of proficiency and just kind of marvel that those that walk amongst us are able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, let me know. We'll talk more if you decide to dive.
Yes. That's probably like another candidate for first lines too. But
for sure. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit. Maybe you can expound. If you had to say, is there a single theme or topic or issue that your work tends to seek to try to address?
I don't know if there's a single theme, but topic wise, there's I'm always working it with like the fantastic in some way or another. I think the best way that I talk about it is like when I first started publishing stuff, and I would like call up my mom and be like, I've got a story coming out, and she would always be like, oh, what's it about? And I'd be like, well, it's about mermaids, but they're old ladies, or it's about if there was gravity, but like not as much gravity. And she'd be like, okay. So it's always just something that like feels a little bit strange to try and quantify, but that's where I really enjoy playing. I feel like whatever I'm writing about thematically always gets there through this kind of unexpected avenue of the fantastic or magical.
Yeah, and your sensibility kind of reminds me, in a lot of ways, all of them positive, of Amber Sparks, who was on this series. And
it's a fantastic compliment. I love Amber's work.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I've told her this during conversations. I would never, ever want anyone to get the impression that I'm describing her work as, fantastic or fairy tale, but she tends to use these themes and this surreal as a way of getting even deeper into what we would call reality. And yeah, so I think people that sleep on, and speaking of Marquez, right? People that sleep on so-called magical realism, or whatever term you want to use, often the people that are using the surreal are giving us, like science fiction, are giving us an even deeper dive into, our day-to-day than realistic fiction.
Yeah. And at least with me, like it's never really intentional. I always start with like kind of the strange premise, and I don't know where it's taking me until I'm like at least a draft in, and then it's like, oh, okay, there is something different that I'm writing about than maybe what I was expecting. But I think that's one of the most fun parts of it.
That's where the magic happens, right? I mean, that's where the subconscious gets in, and yeah, interesting things happen. I've tended to conflate the next two questions because they're just so inextricable, which is the notion of writing routines and writer's block. From your own experience, do you have routines? Have you experienced writer's block? Do you believe in either or both?
I would love to have a writing routine. I'm sure if I did, I would believe in them. But I think that's something that maybe a lot of people are feeling right now. As much as I would love to be somebody who writes every day, my life has never worked out like that. I probably, there was probably a time when I was writing every day, in school, or at least kind of coming close to it. But I really don't have a routine. Everything is kind of like very much when there's time, that's when I write. And I think for that reason, it's hard to believe in writer's block, because it's very rare that I ever feel like I don't know what I want to write, or I don't have any ideas. It's usually like I have been in my spare time making like notes on my phone about, here's a line and here's the starting point for something. And then when I actually get to sit down, I usually already have a pretty good idea of what I want to work on.
Yeah, I think what this series is starting to really solidify is this notion that on either end of that extreme, like a dedicated routine or a monastic type routine is a privilege of sorts. Just like having writer's block is a privilege, I think, for most writers of our ilk, to say, I just sit down and the words weren't flowing. It's like most writers are dying for that time to be able to carve out a little. So I think it's fair to say that on either extreme, there's a little bit of privilege. And for most of us, it's like you do the best you can to try to live a balanced life and make the creativity happen. But it's tough.
Yeah. Well, and the few times that I've felt like I've been able to do that are when I've gone on like a writer's retreat, or like gone away to a workshop, and I've only been able to do that maybe twice before. But those are the moments where I'm able to get so much work done because there's not anything else pulling me in another direction, which is so rare for anybody. And I think that's true for almost every writer. There are very few writers who don't have, a day job of some kind at this point.
Yeah. All right. So how about a setback, artistic or otherwise, that as you look back on it, maybe help put you on the trajectory that you find yourself on now?
I don't know if there's been like a particular setback or anything like that. There was like, when I finished graduate school, I went through a period of a few years, a couple years, or maybe even longer, where I really didn't write almost at all. Um, and I think that was, but I think it was mostly because of other things happening in my life. Like I my father got sick, and then he seemed like he was getting better, and then I got pregnant, and then he passed away, and then I had a new baby, and that was the first time I was a first time mother, and that kind of life stuff just kind of throws you, and I just didn't have the mental energy to write. I wouldn't even say that I was blocked. It was just that it was something I couldn't wrap my head around for a while. But I think if that's, coming away from that has taught me anything, it's I feel a little bit more patient with myself about not having a routine, because I know, there may be there may, for every writer, be some times where things are a little bit slower, and that's okay. It will come back. It's a thing that you get through.
Absolutely. And listen, I'm certainly happy to say that, kind of looking at the art is also the kind of the role of the critic, but it just doesn't take into account. I'm just as inspired by someone like yourself, or any number of people in our, mutual orbits that are parents and sons or daughters and friends and run organizations. And, I think even if someone is really productive and successful, it's like, at what expense? I mean, and I'm someone that loves art for art's sake, and celebrate someone that's productive and creative, and leaves us these gifts. But I think as we get further along into this millennium, I think we all are kind of accepting and embracing the idea that having balance is not only a good thing, but it's a good creative thing. Because the idea of just being so focused at the expense of other things, I don't know if that's really leading to the best artistic life, much less the best human life.
Yeah. Well, and the kind of work I started doing when I came back from that kind of slower period was very different than what I'd done before. And I think it was partly because I felt a little bit freer to just kind of like play with things that I wanted, as opposed to, you know, being focused on what story was most likely to get published or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So this is a tough one too, but talk to us, if you could define or explain what literary success means to you. How would you define or explain it?
Um, so I think it's really just, like anybody, I certainly have like some concrete things that I want to accomplish. I have a book project that I'm very close to finished with, and I'd like to get that to a place where it feels ready to kind of like go out into the world. I want to put together a short story collection at some point, but I, I think success has to mean, for me, just, being invested and interested in what you're writing, being able to make time for it in your life, um, being engaged by what you're writing, being able to um, have a job that keeps you connected to books and writing and literature, which I'm very fortunate to have through both Fall for the Book and through teaching, um, and being part of a community of writers that kind of keeps you invested um, in the wider literary world, but also reminds you why you're doing what you're doing with your own work. Um, as long as I'm at a place where I'm continuing to be able to write, that feels like a success to me.
Well said, beautifully said. And again, you probably won't be surprised to hear that there's been variations on that theme throughout this, which is very refreshing and very real. Again, speaking of privilege, of course, I think we're all entitled to dream about certain levels of success and readership, but boy, it reduces it down to its essence to say, just to be able to write and feel good about it. I think most of us would say, I'll take that any day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. And feeling good about what you're writing is its own challenge, as I think most writers know. So
Most honest writers, absolutely.
yes.
So in closing, could you offer a 1 minute or so exhortation for an aspiring writer that's looking for advice?
I think I would say, read as much as you can, find out what you like to read, what you like to read, because that's how you're going to find the things you're most interested in writing. Read literary journals. I think that's something I wish I had known about more when I was a newer writer, because I certainly didn't read literary journals or even know where to find them when I was younger. And And I think that's kind of how you find your community, is you figure out who are the writers you admire, where are they publishing. um, that's going to lead you to find other people who are writing things you admire, and that's the best way to kind of find your community and become a part of the literary world. And I really think finding a place in that community is what shows young writers more than anything else that there is a place for them out there and a place for their writing.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. And I think that is very important. And just like our talking about the good - bad old days of cassette playlists, back in my formative years, one had to go to a library or just buy the lit journals, sight unseen. And the barriers of entry, the barriers of submission are so much easier these days. There's really no excuse. So yeah, I just want to second. I think your advice is unassailable, but also very sound. If you want to get your bearings, see what's going on around you, and also support those communities, because a lot of free labor goes into producing those journals.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they're doing an incredible service for the literary world. The literary world is much bigger now than it used to be, I think.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of doing services, I'm once again happy to acknowledge and recognize and celebrate the unbelievable hard work that you do to celebrate writers and writing. The Fall for the Book is, certainly near and dear to my heart, but I think it's established itself as a benchmark. It's an event that has long inspired me. So I welcome the opportunity to tell you that the work you do is so meaningful and so helpful to the community. You're just an absolute vital part of our local and national literary scene. So I appreciate you dropping wisdom, and it's always a pleasure to collaborate with you. So I know our paths will continue to cross, but it really was a pleasure and an honor to have you weigh in this series.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. I really, really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
Good. Well, thank you. I'm going to go add those books to my list, and we go enjoy, after finals are over, some well-deserved downtime, because boy, after this fall, you have earned it, sister. So congratulations again. Congratulations on a job well done, and we'll look forward to checking out more of your writing in the coming months and years.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Sean.
All right, Kara, I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date with what's new for 1455. And also, we would like to ask for your support. We depend on champions like you to keep us going. Visit 1455litarts.org and click support to make a contribution in any amount. We'll see you soon.